everyone for inviting me. I'm going to talk about strategic planning, and I think planning's been mentioned pretty much by everybody so far today. Not in a very positive way, I have to say, but hopefully I'm going to put a little bit of positivity into it. So a new dawn for strategic planning. I am a strategic planner. I used to be Director of Planning at the South East Regional Assembly, and before that I headed up the Surrey Structure Plan team. So I've been a strategic planner for a very, very long time. And I think it's fair to say over the last 14 years, I've worked with many parts of England, groups of authorities trying to reinvent the wheel since any sort of formalised approach to strategic planning was abolished in 2010, including Oxfordshire authorities, including the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough authorities, and including in the early days on the Oxford-Cambridge Spatial Arc. And I think it was about just over 2 years ago, Matthew Pennycook, the then shadow housing and planning minister, asked to speak to me about strategic planning. He is a London MP, he was a London councillor, so his world, strategic planning, has always existed, and he wanted to understand why it didn't exist outside of London and what the problems were. We continued talking. I formally advised Labour in the lead up to the elections on planning reform, and then Matthew became Planning and Housing Minister. I think he's already, after 6 months, been the Planning and Housing Minister longer than the last 10, I think. I think we beat transport, I think, from housing and planning. I think we've had about 17 in the last few years, so there's been absolutely no stability there. And I think even I didn't believe it was going to come back until they included it in the manifesto in black and white. So just in terms of the national context and why strategic planning is important, planning was always seen, or certainly for the last 10 years, planners and planning have been branded the enemies of enterprise. It's always been about a bad thing. It's about planning stops things. It's not been about planning doing good things and creating good places. And I think that's where I started with the Labour Party before they became government, selling the proposition that planning was a good thing. Why would the Treasury support planning? That's another thing, and I'll come on to that in a minute as well. That's around funding. But essentially, why is planning a good thing? And the bottom line is, good placemaking is an enabler of good growth. You know, it's as simple as that. Strategic planning has an even more exciting role in that, and again, I'll come on to that in a minute. But it's all part of the same thing, and it's very much now, as you can see from the budget, planning, place, environment, everything that goes into creating good places is front and centre now of the government's growth agenda. So from a planning perspective, and a planner who has worked most of my career either within local authorities or with local authorities, suddenly it's put a really good positive spin on this, and people are sort of actually thinking, the government likes us now, we're good, planners are good, planning's good. But planning system's not great, the planning system's not brilliant, as many people have said this morning, and I think it's fair to say the government is putting in place a lot of changes now to make it a good thing and to help create these good places. I've put a couple of quotes up there from Matthew Pennycook and from Sir Keir Starmer. But the essential context within which a lot of what we look at in planning, for the last 14 years, local plans haven't really been local plans, they've been housing delivery plans. And I think what we're trying to do is get away from that and back to placemaking plans. 1.5 million homes is the target, and if anybody watched the Select Committee last week with Matthew Pennycook, he made the point that's an ambitious target, to say the least. It's a 5-year target. He didn't say we'll never meet it, but I think it's fair to say there are some huge challenges, and it's not all down to planning reform to actually help hit that target within 5 years or at all. But planning is also essential for strategic planning is essential for the plan-led system, and with about 30% of local plans up to date across England, we don't have a plan-led system, it's fair to say. Strategic planning is considered essential to the success of that plan-led system, and the government have set out their ambition to have 100% coverage of local plans within the next 5 years, as well as 100% coverage of strategic plans. big ambitions, but I think anybody that from a local authority here that's worked on a local plan, they know how hard it is, and it has got a lot harder over the last sort of 10, 14 years. We've added more and more into the local plan process, and it has become far more political. Social media, etc., has not made it an easy job to prepare a local plan. There are all sorts of other reasons why local plans aren't in place. I'm working with one authority that is, if you look at it from above, it's just covered in water. And I know parts of this area, they've got the opposite problem. So we've got some really big challenges in terms of getting local plans in place. It's not just about the process, it's actually just a difficult thing to do, and we need to appreciate that. Nonetheless, the plan-led system is a good thing. It's where local communities get to engage. And again, if you've listened, if anybody was at the Labour Party conference or has listened to any time Matthew Pennycook talks about this, he very much talks about being able to shift the conversation upstream, make it more meaningful, have proper community engagement at that local plan stage, and have things like design codes, ensure that design codes and all of these facilitate some really proper, good engagement, which means hopefully further downstream, when you get to the decision making and the development management process, there is less engagement from community, not because it's a bad thing, but because they'll have felt that they were engaged further upstream, and that the local plan, which is what the decisions will be made against, is what they want to see. 6 months, not even 6 months, and we've had a plethora of different announcements. We've had a new towns task force established. We've had letters to planning inspectorate changing the way inspectors have to be able to manage local plans. We've had brownfield site support. We've had an MPPF consultation, and we're just about to hopefully see the final version of that come out before Christmas. It's still on target for that. We've had Homes England, new leadership being put in place, Homes England in terms of the way they work, totally changing. So we've had a huge amount around this. And again, if you speak to or listen to Matthew Pennycook talking, he talks about a whole systems approach. This is not just about solving the housing crisis by building new homes. This is about solving the housing crisis, creating good places by addressing all the different systems that impact on that. And that comes down to local government structure as much as anything else. And I will talk about that very soon. So the national context in terms of why it doesn't work, I don't need to tell you it doesn't work. I think we've had so many reports on the duty to cooperate's failures. We've had so many reports. We've had BPF talking about freight, for example, freight and logistics. It's not just about housing. Strategic planning, looking at things on that larger scale, is absolutely needed. And there hasn't been any report, as far as I know, that has said it's not needed. And I've put some examples, obviously the Oxfordshire strategic plan you will be familiar with. These are three of quite a lot of failures where local authorities have attempted to recreate strategic planning and have failed in most cases have failed because of decisions around housing numbers. There's one or two successes, Leicestershire and Leicester, probably the most successful, but it's few and far between, and I think they have been successful despite the system, not because of it. This is some research as if we needed to convince the government. This is research I was involved in on behalf of the Royal Town Planning Institute earlier this year. I think it's the most extensive research we've carried out on strategic planning ever. We had an amazing response from local authorities and an amazing response from stakeholders. And I think these two graphs point out the fact that it was well over 90%, whoever you spoke to, that said we need a mandatory system. So basically everywhere has to do it, and it needs to be statutory. So the government have taken that on board. This was done before the election, thinking that the election would be in around probably about now. But obviously the election was in July, so this was published just after, but that decision had already been made. It was already confirmed by the government that they would be looking at a mandatory system and a universally applied system. Kate Barker 2, as we were calling it, was a report commissioned earlier this year to look at the housing crisis. Kate had to step down, unfortunately, because she she was going on to the Newtowns task force. But the report moved on. I was a commissioner on this. If you haven't read it, it's a really good practical report with some really good practical recommendations, not just about planning, and it deals with things like support for SMEs, for example, but one of our recommendations there was very much around the mandatory system of strategic plans, and Matthew Pennycook spoke at the launch of this, and his view was pretty much everything in that report chimed with what they were trying to do. So what is strategic planning? And I put this up every time because there is just this misconception that strategic planning is big local plans, and it really isn't. And in one of the earlier conversations in the lead up to the election, talking to Angela Rayner's devolution team, they said, how do we sell this to ministers, the sort of combined authorities and mayors? And I said, well, just tell them what it is. It's a spatial investment framework. That is what strategic planning is. It's a high-level spatial investment framework. And a lot of this conversation has been about long-term investment and building long-term investor confidence. That is part and parcel what strategic planning did for decades before it was abolished in 2010. It's providing that long-term view on how we get to net zero, how we deal with climate change, how we get the investor confidence around infrastructure delivery. So it's not just about housing. What it will do is sort out the housing numbers. That will be one of the roles of the new world of strategic plans. But it's about an integrated framework, and again, that is so important because one of the jobs of these new generation of strategic plans is to look at local nature recovery strategies, climate change plans, the wider environment improvement plans, local transport plans, the new local growth plans, basically looking at all of the different things that go into making good places and integrating them around place at that high level. So it's got a really big job to do, and it's got an awful lot of heavy lifting to do. It is not a big local plan, and I was delighted, again, when Matthew was involved in a debate this week around the Leicester and Leicestershire one in the House of Commons, and he actually said these words: it is not a big local plan. So if there's one thing I want you all to go away with today is strategic planning is not a big local plan. And here are the benefits. Apart from the sort of the wider efficiencies in funding, a lot of this will be about sharing evidence across larger areas. Local plans, a lot of the evidence, lifting up a lot of the evidence that's generated through the local plan process and doing it in a larger area. So there will be efficiencies in that. There'll be efficiencies in the local plan process because local plans won't be doing as much as they have to. So some of the big essential things like decisions around the housing numbers will be done through the strategic plan. It should make local plan processes shorter. It should make the examination process shorter. And again, we've had a lot of local plans who are sitting in examination for 2, 3, sometimes 4 years, which is a cost on the local authority and a cost generally in the local authority not having that up-to-date framework. It is also about aligning funding, making sure that all the different people that go into, all the people with funding, all the people that have a responsibility around infrastructure priorities are all pointing in the same direction. So it's providing that really essential framework for alignment around the investment. And hopefully it's also about generating more income. Lots of discussions going on around things like strategic infrastructure tariffs, and actually just providing a new system in which we can raise more funding. And I'll look back to that point about building investor confidence, because with the best will in the world, our infrastructure is not going to be funded by the public sector in future. It's going to be funded by probably largely the private sector and private sector institutions. So we've got to provide that investor confidence. We've got to tell them this is a 20-25-year plan and it's not going to change, so that there is that confidence to invest in future. So there's a whole load of advantages, but a lot of them are on the financial side of things. Again, this is how we sold it to the Treasury. It's all about the money. So the government's approach, just to sort of finish off there, they are looking at universal coverage, so no part of England will not have a plan. So the mayoral combined authorities, all the areas outside of these areas will have a strategic plan. At the moment, they're talking about the potential to use the spatial development strategy model, which is what the London plan is based on. Although it's not, I don't think that's a model that the government is actually looking at per se. The legislative sort of framework is what they're looking at, but the London plan, for anybody who's familiar with it, is quite a tome, it's quite a detailed plan, but that's not what we're looking at. And so the spatial development strategy will do a few things. The number in future, so your standard methodology number, which is the big scary number, and particularly the big scary number that we know is going to come out of the updated MPPF this next month, that will be allocated at that sub-regional level, not given to individual local planning authorities. Then the choice is to divvy it up. And I think this is really important because what strategic plans also do is offer a larger spatial canvas so that we end up putting development in the best place and not the least worst place. And what we've had with a lot of development over the last few years, last decade or so, is a lot of the housing has been directed to the least worst place, in my view, because it's been done in a very small geography. So this opens up opportunities to actually direct growth to where it's needed. It opens up more opportunities to support that growth with the right infrastructure. And that's not just transport, that's things like water reservoirs, it's things like data centres and the logistics side of things, all the really important environmental and economic infrastructure that goes into creating good places. The ambition is to have all of these in place by 2029. It's likely you're likely to be given quite a short time scale to do it, probably only a couple of years. And the geography will be defined to a large extent by what's happening around the devolution agenda. The map on the right is my attempt at trying to map out where the devolution deals are at the moment. So these are the formal deals. The map on the left is by Local Government Chronicle, which is an attempt to map out where the conversations are happening as well as devolution deals. And as you'll see from the map on the left, there is very, very little that is white, very small pocket. I think it's about 2 areas where there is not active conversations going on around devolution. We were expecting the devolution white paper next week. I understand it's coming out the following week. I've been told by the end of the calendar year, which doesn't give an awful lot of space. So I suspect we'll see it immediately before the MPPF. So it's going to be an extremely busy run-up for anybody that's interested in local government devolution and planning. We've got probably about 2 weeks when we're going to get an awful lot of very big announcements. The devolution geography is really important in this because the funding in future is going to be driven through the devolution process. And there's been a lot last week in the Sunday Times about local government restructuring. It's going to create an awful lot of noise while we're also trying to get the plan-made system in place as well. It's all happening at the same time. The government is driving forward these reforms at a very, very fast pace. So if we've already had the MPPF consultation, we're going to get that at the moment promised by Christmas. The devolution white paper will set out some of the details around the strategic planning regime. I understand there won't be a map in the devolution white paper, but the map will come very quickly after that. And I suspect that's to do with the fact that the white paper is a policy document and therefore implies there's little room for negotiation. And I don't think they want to imply that. So I think the map will come soon after that, but there will be a map. And then we have the Planning and Infrastructure Bill in the first part of next year, which will set out the legislative background for everything to move forward in terms of strategic planning, as well as a wide range of other planning reforms. And then there will also be a little bit in the devolution white paper as well, because things are going to be changing as we go through. So the areas that are outside the devolution, current devolution status, may change into combined authorities, mayoral combined authorities in the next 5 years. So they have to make sure there is legislation to allow for that transition and the transfer of powers. Whoever ends up with the powers for strategic planning, it will eventually end up with a mayoral combined authority if that's what happens. And mayoral combined authorities will have strategic planning powers. There's no debate about that at the moment. So an awful lot happening. And then, of course, next summer, you will also have, for those that are aware of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, National Development Management Policies coming forward, and potentially another review of the NPPF. So it never stops. We're always in constant reform, but I'm hoping that by the end of next year, we will have that period of stability, and I'm really hoping we'll still have the same planning and housing minister as well, and hopefully the Secretary of State, because stability, as you will know, is going to be essential if we're going to be doing any of this. So I've just sort of left you with some thoughts around some issues to think about. You know, what does the geography mean? Is there a role for the pan-regional partnerships in future in terms of managing this geography? There's some big issues around London, there's some big issues in the West Midlands, because the functional geography that is likely to be used is the GLA, the mayor, and in West Midlands, probably the combined authority. But there are also wider functional relationships that we're aware of. In the same place here, you've got Oxfordshire's got its wider relationships with Buckinghamshire and the wider Thames Valley, and you've got the Cambridgeshire relationships with West Suffolk. You've got Suffolk and Norfolk likely to be a spatial planning area. And then you've got what happens to the north with places like Leicestershire. So there's always going to be these wider functional relationships. So what is the role of pan-regional partnerships, whether it's in this form or some sort of form in future? For those that remember things like Serplan in the southeast, you know, one of the roles that they had was to try and manage that wider London and southeast relationship. And there is going to be the need for something that does that, not just on transport, but these wider economic relationships. And the Greenbelt, managing the Greenbelt. I haven't mentioned Greenbelt. I tend to try and avoid it. But other things like data, I know there's been references to data. You know, data is going to be incredibly important in future, and I've already been having conversations with the MHCLG team's digital team around the role of digital technology to actually make strategic planning a quicker process, but also to use in terms of developing spatial strategies, testing different options. And, you know, I'm too old to grasp a lot of what they were talking about. But I did see the potential, and it's exciting in terms of how we do this. These will be very different to what we've done in the past. And then resourcing. I think resourcing is a massive issue. We all know that the current state of planning departments is not great. Trying to attract planners to do the job is really hard. My view from a strategic planning perspective is some of the best strategic planners I've worked with are not planners. They are good partnership people. They're people that coordinate things really well, and they sell things really well. They are not necessarily really good at the spatial planning, but they work with really good spatial planners. So we're going to have to look at a wide range of different skills, and we're going to have to try and find somewhere to get that. And I think there's going to be a lot around joint teams in future. And again, that will solve a lot of the problems in terms of local plans as well, building capacity at that level. So a huge number of issues we've got to try and work through. But I'm really excited about this. I think it's essential. I think it will do wonders in places like this in terms of trying to get the planning system working better. But above all, I think it's essential for just creating good places. Thank you.
Thank you.